You never forget the smell of your first battlefield. They tell you it's the smell of honor, of sacrifice for the God Emperor. They're full of shit. It's the smell of a butcher's shop left in the sun after the power's been cut for a week. It's cooked meat and voided bowels, the coppery tang of blood so thick you can taste it on your tongue like you're sucking on a spent lost power cell. It's the ozone crackle of a lost gunshot, and the deeper, bowel-loosening thump of artillery that doesn't just hit your ears, it vibrates up through the soles of your boots and rattles your teeth in your skull. I've had a lot of first battlefields since then. This one, on the dust ball of Seraph 9, was just the latest in a long, wearying line. My name is Sergeant Kalen of the Cadian 112th, or what's left of it. We're the stubborn bastards who didn't get the memo that our homeworld was destroyed. We just kept fighting because what the hell else were we supposed to do? Lie down and die? That comes soon enough without an invitation. We were dug into the ruins of Hive Secundus, or what the archenemy had left of it. The sky was a perpetual, bruised purple, streaked with the vomit green of warp lightning. The air was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes a home there, a constant companion to the fear. We were low on everything: ammo, promethium, hope. The rations had run out 3 days ago. Now, we were chewing on recaf grinds and the leathery strips of corpse starch that tasted like despair and sawdust. Movement in the ash fog, Sarge, a voice crackled over the squad vox. It was Lissa, our sharpshooter. Her voice was flat, drained. We were all drained. Big something. Not the usual rabble. I shifted, the servos in my aging carapace armor whining in protest, and peered over the shattered permacrete barricade. The ash fog swirled, thick with the particulate of pulverized cities and the souls of the damned. And then I saw it. A hulking, bipedal engine of death, its iron hide studded with blasphemous sigils that hurt the eyes to look at. A war dog. A damned titan killer. It was a death sentence for our entire pocket of resistance. All positions, concentrate fire on that thing's leg joints. I barked into the vox, my voice sounding far calmer than I felt. My guts were ice water. Lissa, see if you can find a lens casing, something soft. The rest of you, pray to the Emperor it doesn't see us. A chorus of grim affirmatives clicked back. What a joke. You think the Emperor hears the whispers of one tired sergeant on a forgotten world? He's got a galaxy to run. He doesn't have time for the likes of us. Our prayers were the crack of lost fire and the solid thump of a croc grenade. That was the only divinity we knew. The world dissolved into noise and light. Lost bolts streaked through the gloom, spattering harmlessly against the war dog's armored hide like red rain. Its head, a grotesque mockery of a canine skull, swiveled towards us. A targeting laser painted my position, a single, malevolent red eye. This was it. The end, on some worthless rock, for a cause so vast I couldn't even comprehend it anymore. I thought of Cadia. Not the battle, not the fall, but the quiet moments. The smell of the pine forests in the northern reaches. A girl I'd known, with laugh lines around her eyes. Simple things. Human things. The things the galaxy is so desperate to grind into dust. Then the sky tore open. It wasn't a warp rift that we were used to. That was a messy, screaming thing. A wound in reality that bled demons and madness. This was clean. A geometric fracture in the fabric of the heavens, silent and profound. The purple and green of the corrupted sky was shoved aside, replaced by a blinding, golden light. It wasn't the sickly gold of the corpse emperor the heretics sneered about. This was a living, breathing light. It was the light of the dawn after the longest night of your life. It was the feeling of a cool hand on a fevered brow. The war dog staggered, its system screeching in protest. Every auspex on the line, every voxcaster, every powered weapon, flared and died. My lasgun's power pack indicator winked out. The hum of my armor's servo motors faded to nothing. For the first time in years, there was silence. Not the absence of sound, but a deep, resonant quiet that pressed in on the ears. The very air grew still and heavy, charged with an impossible potential. We stared, dumbfounded, our immediate, metallic death forgotten. The battle across the entire continent had ceased. From the heretics in their trenches to the Astartes in their bastions, every soul on Seraph 9 was looking up. And then they fell. 13 streaks of light, like falling stars, but these stars burned with purpose. They were comets of fate, each a different hue, each trailing a corona of impossible energy. One burned with a cold, blue frost. Another with a savage, animalistic red. A third with the serene, deep green of a forest world. They slammed into the planet at different points across the globe, and the ground shuddered, not with the violence of an impact, but with a deep, fundamental chime, as if the world itself had been struck like a gong. The light from the rift faded, but the silence remained, broken only by the moan of the wind and the frantic beating of my own heart. "Sarge." It was young Aureus, his voice a trembling whisper. What in the throne's name was that? I had no answer. My mind, trained for decades to process tactical data, to find the threat, the angle, the kill zone, was utterly blank. This was off the map. This was beyond the scriptures, beyond the prophecies. The war dog, its systems rebooting with a series of angry whines, began to stir. The moment of awe was over. The reality of our imminent death came crashing back. I fumbled with my lasgun, trying to eject the dead power cell, my fingers suddenly clumsy. "Get that crock launcher loaded." I yelled, my voice cracking. The spell was broken. The business of dying resumed. But then, a new sound cut through the silence. It was a horn. Not the brassy, imperial bray of our own signal horns, nor the foul, fleshy blare of the heretics' war noises. This was a pure, clear note that spoke of icy peaks and endless winters. It was a sound of absolute, unyielding resolve. From the direction of one of the impacts, a lone figure crested a ridge of rubble. He was tall, but not Astartes tall. He wore battleplate of a design I'd only ever seen in faded murals and the most ancient of chapel stained glass. It was gray-blue, like a winter sky at twilight, and across his shoulders was slung a massive, ornate war horn. In his hands, he carried a formidable-looking bolter, its lines both elegant and brutally functional. He moved with a predator's grace, his gaze sweeping the battlefield. He saw the heretics. He saw the war dog. He saw us, the ragged Imperial Guard, clinging to our worthless piece of rubble. His voice, when he spoke, was not a roar. It was a statement of fact, calm and clear, yet it carried across the kilometer that separated us as if he were standing right next to me. "I am Rogel Dorn." The name hit me like a physical blow. Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, the architect of the Imperial Palace's defenses. A myth. A legend from a time when legends walked the stars. He was supposed to be dead, but a ghost from 10,000 years ago. He raised his bolter, not at the war dog, but at the massed heretic infantry between him and the Titan. The report was deafening, a sound of finality and wrath. Each shot was a perfectly placed execution. He wasn't just killing them, he was erasing them. He advanced, a one-man wall of ceramite and certainty, his fire never ceasing, his pace never faltering. The heretics, to their credit, or their insanity, turned their fire on him. Lost bolts and solid slugs sparked and ricocheted from his armor. He ignored them as a man might ignore a light rain. The war dog, now fully operational, leveled its thermal cannon at him. The air shimmered with gathering heat. Dorn didn't flinch. He didn't even break stride. He simply switched his aim and put a single, Kraken penetrator round directly into the weapon's barrel. The result was catastrophic. The war dog's main armament detonated, shearing the limb clean off and sending the war engine stumbling back, a geyser of plasma and fire erupting from its shoulder. I couldn't breathe. I just stared. This wasn't war as I knew it. War was mud and terror, and watching your friends die to a lucky shot from a cultist you never even saw. This was something else. This was a force of nature. This was a god of war, and he was on our side. Dorn continued his advance, now closing on the crippled war dog. He moved under its belly, a blur of gray-blue, and I saw a massive, power-wreathed chain blade extend from his fist, the fabled storm's teeth. With a series of brutal, precise strikes, he hacked into the machine's leg actuators. Ceramite and plasteel parted like flesh. The war dog let out a final, grinding shriek of metal and collapsed onto its side, a dead heap of blasphemy. The silence returned, deeper this time. The remaining heretics, seeing their greatest weapon felled by a single warrior, broke and ran. Dorn stood over the slain titan, his armor smeared with promethium and gore. He turned, his gaze sweeping over our position once more. He didn't speak to us. He didn't offer words of encouragement or praise. He simply gave a short, sharp nod. An acknowledgement. A mason approving of a well-laid stone in a wall he was building. Then he was gone, moving towards the next point of conflict, his form disappearing into the swirling ash. We were left alone again, in the sudden, deafening quiet. The coppery taste of blood was still in the air. The ozone stink of lost fire. The cold was still biting at our bones. But everything had changed. Aureus was the first to speak, his voice full of a bewildered, fragile hope. The stories are true? The Primarchs, they've come back. I looked at the fallen war dog, a monument to impossible power. I looked at the faces of my squad, etched with a confusion that mirrored my own. Hope is a dangerous thing in the 41st millennium. It's a flicker of light that just makes the surrounding darkness seem deeper. It gets you killed. But as I stared at the spot where a myth had just become reality, a single, treacherous thought wormed its way into my soul, past the cynicism, past the exhaustion, past the certain knowledge of a grim, dark future. I spat a glob of bloody phlegm onto the dust of Seraph 9. "No, son," I said, my voice rough as gravel. "I don't know what's happening, but I'll tell you this. The galaxy just got a lot more interesting and a hell of a lot more dangerous. For everyone." I keyed my vox, the unit sputtering back to life. "All Cadian elements, this is Sergeant Kalen. Report in. And for throne's sake, somebody find me a working power cell." The war wasn't over. It had just changed. And we were still in it. They say a soldier's memory is a patchwork of scars and smells. The sharp, clean scent of ozone after a lost volley. The cloying sweetness of promethium and cooked meat. The iron and salt stink of a bayonet wound. But for 3 days after he of the winter sky walked out of our reality and killed a war dog with nothing but a bolter and a bad attitude, the only thing any of us could remember was the silence. It was a thick, woolly quiet, the kind that presses in on your eardrums after a lifetime of artillery. It was wrong. The enemy was still out there, the traitor legions and their cultist filth, but they'd pulled back. Their dark pacts and warp-tainted courage had broken against the simple, unyielding fact of a Primarch. We'd caught a glimpse of the universe's operating system, and it had a face of cold, hard certainty. We spent those 3 days counting our dead, which was a short list, and counting our blessings, which was even shorter. We scavenged what we could from the dead, because the Munitorum hadn't bothered to resupply a regiment they'd probably already marked as destroyed on some scribe's data slate back on Terra. I found a half-pack of low sticks on a dead corporal from Cantrell, the paper dry and brittle as old bones. I lit one with a spark lighter, the first real smoke I'd had in a month. It tasted of dust and regret, and it was goddamn beautiful. "Think he's still out there, Sarge?" Lissa asked. She was cleaning her long loss, her movements precise, ritualistic. It was the only prayer she knew. Her eyes, always sharp, now held a new kind of intensity. She'd seen the impossible, and her sniper's brain was trying to calculate the trajectory. "Dorn," I grunted, exhaling a plume of gray smoke. "He's not a key, Lissa. He's a force of nature. An avalanche doesn't stick around to see if it buried the village. It just moves on to the next mountain." "The astropaths are screaming," young Aureus muttered, hunched over a dead voxcaster he was trying to cannibalize. "Not screaming in pain, I don't think. More like screaming in one key. A single, bloody loud note. It's coming from everywhere. Choir master says it's a symphony of awakening. Says it's a miracle." I shot him a look. Aureus was a good kid, but he still had a bit of the Shrine World zealot in him. He saw the Emperor's hand in a lucky shot and his divine wrath in a malfunctioning plasma coil. A miracle, Aureus, is when your rations aren't full of weevils. This is an event. And events in the 41st millennium usually mean a lot of people are about to die in new and exciting ways. The truth was, the astropathic choir was going insane. You could feel it, a psychic pressure building in the air, a static charge that made the hair on your arms stand up. It wasn't the chaotic, soul-rending terror of the warp. This was ordered, purposeful, like 1,000 different melodies, each from a different star system, all trying to harmonize into a single, galaxy-shaking chord. On the fourth day, the silence broke. It wasn't the enemy. It was a ship. It tore into the real space above Seraph 9 with the sound of a continent splitting in two. This wasn't the clean, golden fracture that had heralded the Primarchs. This was violent, angry, a scar of fire and molten metal across the sky. It was a Legion battleship, a design so ancient it looked like a cathedral that had decided to go to war. Its hull was the color of blood and tarnished bronze, and from its prow glared a bestial metal face, a snarling maw of weapon batteries. The Conqueror. I knew its name, the way every guardsman knows the names of the monsters under his bed. It was the flagship of the World Eaters. "Oh, throne," someone whispered over the Vox. It might have been me. From the belly of that monstrous ship, drop pods fell like a meteor shower of pure hate. They didn't drift down on retros. They screamed, punching through the atmosphere on columns of fire and fury, aimed directly at the heart of the largest trader encampment on the planet, a place we'd called the Screaming Pits. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a slaughterhouse shift. We were too far to see the details, thank the Emperor for small mercies. But we could hear it. The chain axes. They have a sound, you see. A specific, high-revving snarl that cuts through all other battlefield noise. It's the sound of a butcher's tool, not a soldier's weapon. And we could hear them, thousands of them, rising and falling in a discordant, roaring chorus. And then a new sound, a bellow. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, primal expression of rage that transcended language. It was the sound of a world's tectonic plates grinding together in pain. It was the sound of a father finding his murdered children. It was the sound of the nails. Angren. The name echoed across the blasted plains, a psychic aftershock that made my vision blur. For a moment, I wasn't on Seraph 9. I was in a blood-soaked arena, sand in my teeth, the roars of a faceless crowd in my ears, the taste of absolute, world-ending fury in my heart. I gasped, shaking my head, my knuckles white where I gripped my lasgun. Next to me, Aureas had vomited. We saw the aftermath on the long-range picked scanners. The trader encampment was gone. Not defeated. Erased. The ground was churned into a red slurry, a paste of men and metal. And standing in the center of it all was a giant. A giant of brass and crimson, with a crest of iron spines and weapons where his hands should be. He stood, chest heaving, surrounded by his sons, the World Eaters, who were themselves lost to the same red mist. They were killing anything that still moved and a few things that didn't. 2 Primarchs. One of cold, unyielding order. One of hot, universe-screaming rage. They were back, and they were on the same side. The thought should have been comforting. It was terrifying. "The reports are coming in from the other fronts," Lissa said later, her face pale as she scanned the tactical data slate we'd managed to get partially operational. "It's not just here, Sarge. It's everywhere. The Ultramar system. Fenris. Nocturne. Kagras. They're all back." "All of them?" Aureas asked, his voice trembling with something between terror and rapture. "All 13 loyal sons," Lissa confirmed, her voice flat. "Gilliman, the Lion, Russ, Vulcan, Corax, Khan, Dorn, the Gorgon, Sanguinius, the Angel, all of them. They just appeared. At the head of their chapters, in the heart of their domains, at the moment of greatest need." Sanguinius. The name landed in the pit of my stomach like a stone. The beautiful one. The angel. He died. Every Imperial citizen knows that. He died at the hands of the arch-traitor on the vengeful spirit. His death was the foundational tragedy of our bloody empire. If he was back, then the rules of history itself had been rewritten. "What does it mean?" Aureas pressed, his eyes wide. "I thought of Dorn's silent, efficient butchery. I thought of Angren's world-ending scream. I thought of the stories, the old, half-remembered tales of the Great Crusade, a time when these demigods had walked together, a band of brothers united. It means, kid, I said, stubbing out the low stick on the permacrete, that the family reunion is going to be a bloody mess. The galaxy, for 10,000 years, had been a simple, if horrifying, equation. The Imperium, a rotting carcass, holding the line against the darkness. The enemy, a horde of monsters and madmen from beyond the stars. It was a war of attrition, a slow, grinding decline into night. But this changed the math. This introduced variables of godlike power and ancient, festering grudges. The Primarchs weren't just super soldiers. They were ideals. They were philosophies of war made flesh. Dorn believed in the unbreakable wall. Angron believed in the unstoppable hammer. What happens when the hammer tries to shape the wall? That night, the sky didn't just hold the cold, distant light of stars and the sickly glow of the warp. Now, it held the fiery trails of Legion ships, responding to a call older than the Imperium itself. A Crusade-era battleship, the Invincible Reason, hung in low orbit like a shard of polished obsidian, the personal flagship of the Lion. Elsewhere, the sleek, impossibly fast forms of White Scar's escorts darted like hunting hawks. We were no longer fighting a war on Seraph 9. We were spectators at the dawn of a new age, or the violent end of an old one. We were the grunts in the mud, watching as the architects of humanity's destiny returned to the drawing board, and the blueprint was written in blood. I looked at my squad. Lyssa, the cynic, now watching the skies with a hunter's calculation. Orias, the zealot, his faith reforged into something harder, brighter, and more dangerous. The others, the grizzled veterans who'd long since given up on anything but the man next to them. They all had a new light in their eyes. It wasn't just hope. It was purpose, a direction for their defiance. And me? I felt older than the dust of this world. I'd spent my life holding a line that was always crumbling. Now, the line was being redrawn by hands far more capable than mine. It should have been a relief, but all I felt was a cold dread. I'd seen what one Primarch could do. I couldn't imagine what 13 would unleash. The silence was truly over. The storm had begun, and we were all caught in its opening salvo. There's a rhythm to war, a terrible, grinding cadence that gets into your blood until your heartbeat syncs with the thump of artillery and the rattle of the heavy bolter. For days after the Primarchs fell, that rhythm was shattered. The familiar, hateful music of our existence, the scream of incoming shells, the static hiss of the Vox, the constant, low-grade terror, was replaced by a deafening, unnerving quiet, punctuated by world-shaking events we couldn't comprehend. We were ants on the floor of a cathedral while gods debated the fate of the universe above our heads. The traitors, those that Angron hadn't personally turned into chum, were in full, panicked retreat. Their cohesion, a foul mimicry of brotherhood held together by fear and dark pacts, evaporated. They weren't an army anymore. They were a contagion fleeing a cauterizing flame. We took potshots at them as they ran. It felt petty, like throwing stones at a tidal wave. Our own command structure was in tatters. The Lord General, a pompous fool who'd been hiding in a deep bunker 50 clicks to the rear, started issuing orders again. His voice, fat with self-importance, crackled over the regimental voxnet, spouting nonsense about divine mandate and the Emperor's renewed crusade. He ordered us to form up and advance, to press the advantage. Press the advantage. I looked at my squad. We had 6 functional lasguns between 10 of us. Our flak armor was more patch and primer than original ceramite. We were running on recaf fumes and the grim satisfaction of having outlived another day. The only advantage we had was that the things trying to kill us were now more scared of something else. Command wants us to move up, I said, my voice a dry rasp. Take the high ground at grid secunda 7. Lyssa didn't even look up from her scope. The high ground is a radioactive slag heap crawling with plague zombies the Death Guard left behind. It's a tactical nullity. I know, I said. Orias, however, had a new fire in his eyes. But the Primarchs are with us. We can't just sit here. This is the moment the Lectitio Divinitatis foretold, the gathering of the suns. I fixed him with a stare that had made greener troopers than him piss their carapace. Aureus, the only thing gathering right now is a shitstorm of biblical proportions. Dorn and Angron are on the same side in the same way a lightning bolt and a forest fire are on the same side during a drought. They might both burn the enemy, but you don't want to be standing between them. The debate was rendered moot by the arrival of the third. It began with a scent, a strange, floral perfume cutting through the entrenched smells of rot and ozone. It was cloying, too perfect, like a beautiful flower you find growing from a corpse. Then came the light. A shimmering, opalescent haze on the horizon, resolving into a host of warriors whose armor shone with a captured rainbow sheen. They moved with an unnatural, fluid grace, their forms impossibly sleek, their weapons works of art that seemed too delicate for the brutal business of killing. Emperor's children. My gut clenched. I'd fought their corrupted kind before, the noise-marred monstrosities who found symphony in screams. But these were pristine. Perfect. They were the ideal from which the monsters had fallen. They fell upon the fleeing traitors not with the cold efficiency of the imperial fists or the berserk fury of the world eaters, but with a chilling, artistic precision. It wasn't a battle, it was a dissection. Bolter rounds were placed with surgical accuracy, severing spinal columns, piercing brainstems. Chain's words, polished to a mirror finish, hummed as they carved through flesh and bone in elegant, sweeping arcs. There was no rage, no hatred. There was only practice. And at their heart he walked. He was taller than I had imagined, a figure of sculpted auramite and royal purple. His armor was a testament to a lost age's artistry, every curve and filigree speaking of a time when war could be considered a noble pursuit. A great, flowing cloak of iridescent feathers shifted color with his every step. In his hand he held a massive, ornate spear, its blade glowing with a soft, internal light. His face, visible through his open helm, was so impossibly handsome it was painful to look upon. It was a face that belonged on a stained glass window, not a battlefield. Fulgrim, the Phoenician. He didn't engage the main body of the fleeing heretics. He seemed to be hunting for something specific. His gaze, cold and discerning as a gem cutter's, swept the battlefield until it settled on a particular figure. A traitor commander, a bloated chaos sorcerer wreathed in flickering green flames, trying to rally his men. Fulgrim moved. It wasn't a run, it was a dance. A fluid, terrifyingly beautiful series of motions that flowed through the chaos of the rout. He sidestepped bolter fire without seeming to notice it, his spear a blur as it effortlessly deflected a spray of autocannon shells. He closed the 100-meter gap in a handful of heartbeats. The sorcerer saw him coming and unleashed a torrent of warp fire. Fulgrim didn't dodge. He met it with the head of his spear, and the baleful energy parted around him like water around a stone, harmlessly dissipating. There was no contest. It was a master toying with a novice. He spoke, his voice a melodic baritone that carried across the din, laced with a profound, almost bored disappointment. Your form is appalling. Your footwork, a disgrace. You wield the energies of the immaterium with the grace of a drunken ogryn. The sorcerer, enraged and terrified, swung a power maul. Fulgrim caught the haft of the weapon with his free hand, stopping the blow dead. With a contemptuous flick of his wrist, he snapped it in two. The pursuit of perfection is the only worthy goal, Fulgrim continued, as if delivering a lecture. You have settled for corruption. A cheap imitation of power. It offends me. He thrust his spear, the blade of the lyre, forward. It wasn't a killing blow. It was a precise strike, severing the sorcerer's primary vocal cords and the warp conduit nodes grafted to his spine. The heretic collapsed, gurgling, his power extinguished, rendered a helpless, silent lump of flesh. Fulgrim looked down at his work, his perfect features etched with distaste. He wiped the tip of his spear clean on the sorcerer's robes, a fastidious gesture. Then he turned, his eyes scanning the battlefield once more, completely ignoring the rest of the slaughter being carried out by his sons. His gaze passed over our position. For a fleeting second, those cold, perfect eyes met mine. There was no recognition, no camaraderie, no shared purpose. There was only an assessment. The way a sculptor looks at a block of marble, judging its flaws, its potential. I was not a brother in arms. I was raw material. Possibly useful, probably not. Then he was gone, flowing back through the battle, his cloak of feathers shimmering. The fight, such as it was over. The last organized resistance on Seraph 9 had been meticulously, artistically erased. We stood there, in the sudden quiet, surrounded by the beautiful, deadly warriors of the 3rd Legion. They didn't cheer. They didn't boast. They simply began policing the battlefield, collecting trophies. A particularly well-preserved helmet here, an interestingly mutated limb there, with the detached air of curators. Lissa lowered her long loss, her knuckles white. "He looked at us," she whispered. "He looked right at us." "I know," I said, my mouth dry. "He didn't see soldiers," she continued, her voice hollow. "He saw imperfections." That was the truth of it. Dorn had seen us as a part of his wall, a stone to be placed or replaced. Angron probably hadn't seen us at all, lost in the red haze. But Fulgrim? He saw us. And he found us wanting. The Vox crackled. It was the Lord General again, his voice trembling now with a new kind of fear. "All units, stand by for new command protocols. Direct from the office of the Regent of Imperium Nihilus. From the Lord Guilliman himself." A new data packet scrolled across our battered slate. It was a reorganization order. The entire command structure of the Seraph 9 theater was being dissolved. Our regiment, the Cadian 112th, was being reassigned. Attached to a new, Crusade-era fleet muster. We were no longer part of the Astra Militarum as we knew it. We were being absorbed into the logistical machine of the returned Ultramarines. We were now part of the Avenging Sun's grand strategy. A single, ragged data point in the cold, logical calculus of Robot Guilliman. Orias looked at the slate, his face a mask of awe. "We're going to fight beside the Ultramarines? The Primarch himself?" I didn't answer. I looked at the perfect, dead forms of the Emperor's children, already withdrawing as cleanly as they had arrived. I thought of Dorn's unyielding silence and Angren's world-ending rage. I thought of Fulgrim's disdainful gaze. We weren't just fighting a war anymore. We were pieces on a board being played by masters who had been absent for 10,000 years. Masters with very different, very strong ideas about how the game should be won. The grinding rhythm of war was gone, replaced by the silent, terrifying hum of a galaxy being remade. And we, the grunts in the mud, were just beginning to understand the price of that remaking. You don't meet a Primarch. You endure their presence. It's like standing at the epicenter of a gravity well, where the air is so thick with purpose it's hard to breathe. 3 days after Fulgrim's chillingly perfect intervention, that gravity well descended upon us in the form of a Thunderhawk gunship the color of a deep-sea abyss, its hull marked with the stylized U of Ultramar. It didn't land so much as impose itself upon the ruined landscape, its engines screaming a note of pure, unadulterated authority that silenced the ever-present moan of the wind. The ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss, and out they came. Ultramarines. A full squad. Their blue armor was pristine, untouched by the grime of Seraph 9, their movements synchronized to a degree that felt unnatural. They fanned out, their bolters held at a ready port arms, their helmeted gazes scanning the rubble we called a command post with an air of detached assessment. They weren't here to fight. They were here to audit. Behind them, a figure emerged. He was not in armor, but in a functional dark blue duty robe, its fabric stark and severe against the gilded trim. He carried a data slate in one hand, his gaze already fixed on it, his other hand making minute, scrolling gestures. He was a giant, of course, but it was the sheer, focused mass of his intellect that felt overwhelming. The air around him crackled with processed information. You could almost see the streams of data, logistical reports, casualty lists, supply line schematics, flowing into him and being synthesized into cold, hard fact. Robot Guilliman, the Avenging Sun, the Lord Commander of the Imperium. He didn't look at the sky, scarred by warp rifts and the arrival of gods. He didn't look at the bodies being piled for burning. He looked at the broken supply containers, the jury-rigged voxcasters, the tired, dirty faces of my squad. We were a data point. A problematic one. Our Lord General, a man named Stophus, practically tripped over his own polished boots rushing to greet him. "My Lord Primarch," he stammered, snapping off a salute so sharp I thought his arm would break. "An honor. The good Emperor's light shines upon." Gilliman's voice cut him off. It was not loud. It was precise. A tool for cutting through obfuscation and nonsense. It held the weight of entire star systems. "General Stophus, your initial after-action report listed Promethium reserves at 40%. My audit of your logistical manifests indicates a true value of 7.3%. Explain the discrepancy." Stophus froze, his mouth opening and closing like a grounded fish. "My lord, there were unforeseen expenditures of battlefield attrition." "Attrition is foreseeable, General," Gilliman stated, his eyes still on the slate. "It is, in fact, the primary variable in military logistics. Your failure to account for it resulted in the loss of 3 Lehman Russ squadrons and the tactical withdrawal from the Chorus salient. A salient, I note, that was indefensible according to the terrain analysis provided to you 6 weeks ago." He didn't sound angry. He sounded disappointed. Like a master mechanic finding a vital component had been replaced with a cheap imitation. It was 1,000 times worse than any general's frothing rage. He finally looked up from his slate, his blue eyes, ancient and weary, sweeping over our ragged formation. They paused on a Las rifle held by one of my troopers, its stock cracked and bound with wire. "Sergeant," Gilliman said, and I felt my spine straighten of its own accord. "Your assessment of the M36 Cantrell pattern loss gun. Rate of failure for the primary power coupler." The question was so unexpected, so specific, it took me a second to find my voice. The coupler, my lord? It burns out after about 500 full power shots in rapid succession. We learn to swap them out preemptively. If you don't, the weapon vents plasma into the firing chamber. He gave a short, sharp nod, inputting something into his slate. A design flaw documented in M37 but never rectified due to the Adeptus Mechanicus doctrinal inertia. It has resulted in an estimated 18% casualty rate from weapon malfunction across the Imperial Guard for the last millennium. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I wasn't just a piece of data. I was a source of data. Your practical experience confirms the archival record. Thank you, Sergeant. He turned back to the trembling General Stophus. You are relieved of command, General. Your staff will report to my Logister cadre for debriefing. The Cadian 112th is hereby seconded to the Crusade Fleet Terra's reclamation. You will draw arms and armor from the fleet forges. The Cantrell pattern loss guns are to be phased out and replaced with the updated Acatran pattern Mark IV, which rectifies the coupler issue. He spoke and it was done. A lifetime of political maneuvering, of patronage and privilege, wiped away in 3 sentences. Stophus was led away by 2 of the Ultramarines, his face a mask of stunned humiliation. Gilliman's gaze returned to me. Sergeant Kalen, you have frontline experience on this world. You will provide a tactical summary to my equerry. Focus on enemy behavioral patterns outside of direct demonic influence. The traitor militias. Their supply sources. Their morale. Yes, my lord, I managed to croak. He gave another one of those curt nods, then turned and walked back towards the Thunderhawk, already engrossed in his data slate once more. The Ultramarines fell in around him, a living fortress of ceramite and certainty. The gunship's engines whined back to life, and it lifted off, the downdraft whipping dust and ash into a frenzy. As it climbed, another ship, vast and majestic, became visible in the high atmosphere, hanging like a blue steel sword over the world. The Macridge's honor. We stood there, in the sudden vacuum left by his departure. The Lord General was gone. Our outdated, failing weapons were to be replaced. We had a new, clear purpose. Oria's was practically vibrating. Did you hear? He thanked you. The Regent of the Imperium thanked you. Lissa just stared at the spot where the Thunderhawk had been. He didn't thank him, she said, her voice quiet. He processed him. We're not soldiers to him. We're variables in an equation. Malfunction rates. Attrition coefficients. He's fixing things, Orias insisted, his faith a blazing sun. He's making it right. Is he? Lissa countered, turning to him. He just dissolved a command structure that, for all its flaws, kept us alive. He's plugging us into a machine so vast we'll never see its edges. We're not the Cadian 112th anymore. We're Asset Gamma 7. I said nothing. I was thinking about the look in Gilliman's eyes. There was no fire of faith, no rage of betrayal, no artistic obsession. There was only a profound, galaxy-sized exhaustion. He had woken up to a nightmare, a bureaucracy of the damned, and he was trying to fix it with a spreadsheet. He was trying to heal a cancer with administrative reform. It was the most terrifying thing I had witnessed yet, because Dorn's walls could be shattered. Angren's rage could burn itself out. Fulgrim's perfection could find a flaw in itself. But Gilliman's logic? His relentless, grinding, unassailable reason? That was a force that wouldn't stop. It would just keep optimizing and streamlining and calculating until the entire bloody mess of the Imperium was running on time, even if it was running headlong into oblivion. We had been saved from the chaos of war by the cold, hard embrace of the machine. And as I looked at the fresh, unissued Akatran pattern loss guns being unloaded from a newly arrived transport, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just traded one kind of soul-crushing horror for another. We were no longer fighting for our lives in the mud. We were being inputted into the grand strategy of a demigod who saw the universe as a series of interlocking, solvable problems. The weight of the crown wasn't just on his brow. It was on all of us. And it was crushing. The new loss guns were efficient. The Akatran pattern Mark IV had a higher rate of fire, a more stable power cell, and the coupler didn't feel like it was going to melt your face off after a sustained firefight. They were delivered with fresh uniforms, proper medkits, and rations that weren't just flavored sawdust. It was the kind of logistical miracle priests sermonize about. It felt wrong. Gilliman's touch was like a master surgeon's, precise, effective, and utterly impersonal. The bleeding had been stopped, the patient was stabilized, but the soul of the thing, the messy, chaotic human spirit of the regiment, was being quietly sidelined. We were becoming a component in the Machina Imperialis. Reliable. Interchangeable. We were ordered to secure and hold a location designated Sigma 7, a jagged spire of black rock that thrust up from the plains like a broken bone. It was a pointless piece of real estate of no tactical value I could see. But the order came from the new command structure, the Ultramarines-led Logister Corps, and it was accompanied by a stream of data specifying exact defensive placements, overlapping fields of fire, and patrol schedules. Deviation was not recommended. "Why here, Sarge?" Orias asked, hefting a crate of freshly manufactured crock grenades. The kid was thriving in this new order. The certainty of it, the clear lines of authority, it was the scripture of the Tactica Imperialis made manifest. "There's nothing here." "There's a reading," Lissa said, not looking up from the Auspex scanner. She'd been quiet since Gilliman's visit, her cynicism curdling into something darker, more observant. A low-level energy signature. Not power, not warp. Something else. Resonant. The Logister brief flagged it for investigation. We dug in. Following the precise schematics felt like painting by numbers. We were laying out a fortress designed by a mind that saw angles and trajectories where we saw rubble and cover. It was unnervingly perfect. As the last prefab bulwark was slotted into place with a satisfying clunk, the air changed. It wasn't a smell or a sound. It was a pressure, a deep, subaudible hum that you felt in the marrow of your bones. The black rock of the spire itself seemed to drink the wan light of the sun, growing darker, more profound. Then, from the shadows at the base of the spire, a figure emerged. He didn't walk out. He was just there, as if he had been part of the stone all along and had simply decided to step forward. His armor was the color of unpolished iron, dented and scarred, layered with the grime of 10,000 years. It was devoid of ornament, of heraldry, of any mark of pride. It was the armor of a function, a tool for a singular, grim purpose. In one hand, he held a massive, brutal-looking hammer, its head a block of dark metal that seemed to distort the space around it. He was shorter than the other Primarchs I'd seen, more compact, but the density of his presence was immense. He felt heavier, more real, than the world around him. He didn't look at us, his sons, the dozen or so Deathwatch Marines who had appeared as silently as he had, their black armor a brotherhood of shadows. His gaze was fixed on the rock of the spire, his head tilted as if listening. This was not the cold certainty of Dorn, the berserk fury of Angron, the artistic disdain of Fulgrim, or the grinding logic of Guilliman. This was something else. This was patience. The patience of a mountain. The patience of a grave. Vulcan. The Gorgon. The Lord of Drakes. One of my troopers, a new transfer named Evren, instinctively brought his new Akatran lasgun to his shoulder. The motion was a whisper, a fraction of a sound. Vulcan's head turned. Not quickly. With the inevitable, grinding slowness of a tectonic plate. His eyes, hidden in the shadows of his helm, were two pits of absolute blackness. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The intent was a physical force. Everin froze, his finger on the trigger guard, his face draining of all color. He slowly, carefully, lowered the weapon. Vulcan held his gaze for a moment longer, a silent lesson delivered, then turned back to the rock. He placed a massive, gauntlet hand against the stone. The deep hum intensified, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. He spoke that. His voice was the sound of grinding stones, of continents settling. It was low, devoid of emotion, each word a carefully measured weight. The stone remembers, he rumbled. It remembers the fire of its birth. It remembers the pressure that forged it. It remembers the footfalls of the Xenos that defiled it. He leaned closer, his helm almost touching the rock face. There is a hollow place here. A pocket, shaped by hands that were not hands. A memory of a wrongness. He stepped back and raised his hammer, Dawnbringer. There was no theatrical wind-up, no roar of challenge. It was a simple, functional movement. He struck the rock. The impact made no sound. Instead, a wave of force erupted from the point of impact, silent and invisible. It didn't shatter the rock, it unraveled it. The black stone dissolved into a fine, gray dust that fell in a perfect, geometric cone. Where the spire had been, a smooth, hemispherical chamber was revealed, hidden for millennia. Inside, the air was stale, cold, and thick with the scent of ozone and something sweetly organic. Strange, pulsating growths, like metallic fungi, covered the walls, glowing with a soft, sickly light. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a cage of writhing energy, was a Xenos artifact. It was an angular, non-Euclidean thing, made of a substance that seemed to be both crystal and light, humming with a malevolent intelligence. Necrons. Vulcan stared at the artifact, his head cocked again. A listening post. A shard of a dead mind, left to watch. To learn. He took a step into the chamber. The metallic fungi recoiled from his presence, their light flickering. One of the Deathwatch Marines, his shoulder pad marked with the icon of the Howling Griffins, spoke, his voice filtered and grim. "My lord, we should call for a tech priest specialist. The Zenorite writes." Vulcan ignored him. He walked directly to the pulsating artifact, his hammer held loosely at his side. He studied it for a long moment, his silence more intimidating than any threat. "There is no knowledge here," he stated, his voice final. "Only a pattern. A trap for the curious." He raised Dawnbringer again. "My lord," the Deathwatch Marine protested. "The Ordo Xenos." The hammer fell. It didn't strike the artifact. It struck the space around the artifact. The same silent, unraveling force erupted. The writhing energy cage dissolved. The pulsating fungi turned to inert dust. The Xenos artifact itself didn't shatter, it simply ceased. Its complex geometry flattened, its light extinguished, its very substance rendered into a harmless, gray slurry that dripped from a suddenly empty pedestal. In the space of a heartbeat, a hidden, technologically sublime threat of incalculable age and power was not destroyed, but unmade. Erased from reality as if it had never been. Vulcan lowered his hammer. He turned and walked out of the now empty, dust-filled chamber. He paused as he passed our position, his hidden gaze sweeping over our perfectly laid defenses, our new loss guns, our faces filled with a new kind of awe. His voice, that grinding stone whisper, was for us alone. "You build a fine wall, Sergeant," he said, his tone utterly unreadable. "But you forget to ask what sleeps beneath it." Then he was gone, he and his death watch, melting back into the shadows from whence they came, leaving us standing in the silence of a solved problem. We looked at the hollowed-out spire. We looked at our perfect, by-the-book defenses. We looked at the spot where a Xeno's nightmare had been, and now was not. Oria's was the first to speak, his voice small. He didn't even scan it. He didn't consult the data slates. He just knew. Lissa let out a long, slow breath. He didn't need to scan it, Oria's. He listened to the stone. He understands the nature of things in a way Gilliman never will. The Regent sees the galaxy as a system to be optimized. The Gorgon. He sees it as a thing to be forged. Or broken. I said nothing. I walked over to the edge of the hollowed-out chamber and looked down into the dust. Vulcan hadn't just destroyed a threat. He had demonstrated a fundamental truth. Gilliman's logic was a powerful tool, but it was a surface thing. It could organize, it could calculate, it could build efficient walls. But Vulcan dealt in deeper truths. In the essence of materials. In the memory of stone. He hadn't followed a protocol. He had applied a principle. The principle was simple. That which is alien, that which is a threat to the fundamental nature of man, does not deserve to be studied. It deserves to be forgotten. It was a terrifying, profound, and grimly comforting thought. In a universe of infinite complexity and horror, there was a Primarch whose entire philosophy was a hammer. And sometimes, the most complex problem has a very simple solution. You just have to know what needs to be broken. Efficiency is a cold comfort when the sky starts to bleed. The New Order, Gilliman's grand design, lasted exactly 17 days. 17 days of clean rations, predictable patrols, and the silent, grinding progress of the Crusade Fleet Terra's reclamation as it began its work of systematic pacification. We were a cog, well-oiled and turning smoothly. It felt like a dream or a particularly elaborate form of sedation. Then the storm hit. It didn't come from the warp. It came from the system's edge, moving with a speed that defied physics. One moment, the long-range Auspex showed empty space. The next, a fleet of ships, lean and predatory, their prows shaped like snarling bestial faces, erupted into the Seraph system. They didn't broadcast hails. They didn't issue demands. They just opened fire. The Voxnets exploded into a chaos of overlapping shouts and static. They're everywhere. The indomitable will is breaking up. Boarding actions. They're in the gun decks. For the love of the Emperor, someone get a targeting lock. The screen of our tactical slate dissolved into a mess of red threat icons. This wasn't the disordered retreat of the archenemy. This was a coordinated, lightning-fast assault of a kind I'd never seen. They moved like hunters, striking supply convoys, crippling communications relays, vanishing before a counterattack could be mounted. Who in the seven hells is that? Lissa snarled, her hands flying over the Auspex controls, trying to filter the jamming signals that screeched across all frequencies. Before I could form a guess, a new voice cut through the bedlam. It was a snarl, guttural and laced with static, yet it carried an undeniable, savage authority. It was the voice of a pack leader calling the hunt. All Imperial units, this is Jagatai of the White Scars. The Drukhari Raiders think this system is their new hunting ground. They are mistaken. Stop trying to form a line. You are not a wall. You are bait. Draw their attention. My Kashyyyk will do the rest. Out. The Khan. The world. A new data stream, crude and fast, overlaid our own. It showed no grand strategy, no complex formations. It was a series of flashing vectors, paths of least resistance through the chaos, marked with simple, brutal instructions. Lure. Harass. Survive. Bait. Orias yelped, his face pale. He wants us to be bait? A savage grin spread across Lissa's face. It was the first real emotion I'd seen from her in weeks. Finally, someone who understands the game. She slammed a fresh power cell into her long loss. He's not asking us to hold. He's asking us to run. I can do that. The order from the Ultramarines command was a stark contrast, a stream of frantic, logical countermands. All units, disregard unauthorized transmissions. Form defensive perimeters at designated rally points Gamma and Epsilon. Protect the Logister convoys. The Vox cut out as a shadow fell over our position. Not the shadow of a ship, but of something faster, lower. A Stormbird, its hull painted in stark white and red, screaming over the ridgeline so low I could feel the heat from its engines. It didn't land. Its rear ramp was open, and for a heartbeat I saw him. He was half kneeling at the ramp's edge, one hand gripping an overhead strap. He wore artificer armor of white and gold, but it was scarred and practical, built for speed, not ceremony. A long, power scimitar was strapped to his back. His face, sharp and fierce, was turned towards the horizon, his black top knot whipping in the hurricane wind. He wasn't looking at the battle. He was feeling it, tasting the currents of it. Then he was gone, the Stormbird banking so hard its wings nearly clipped the ground, vanishing behind a plume of dust and ash. A moment later, the Drukhari raiders who had been closing on our position, a pack of skimmers crewed by cackling, blade-wielding monsters, erupted in a storm of mass-reactive fire and roaring chain blades. White Scars attack bikes and land speeders, moving in a silent, terrifying unison, hit them from the flanks and rear. There was no warning, no battle cry, just the sudden, brutal application of extreme violence, and then they were gone, chasing the next target. It was war as a whirlwind. It was chaos, but it was a chaos he controlled. Throne, Aureus breathed, his knuckles white on his lost gun. They're everywhere. That's the point, I said, the Khan's words echoing in my head. You are not a wall. For my entire life, the Imperial Guard had been a wall. We stood, we bled, we died, and if we were lucky, the wall held for another day. The White Scars were the cavalry we never had. They were the storm that hit the enemy after they'd committed to the wall. We moved, following the Khan's crude vectors. We didn't form a perimeter. We ran a fighting retreat, drawing a squadron of Reaver jet bikes into a narrow canyon. We were the anvil. We never saw the hammer. One second the Drukhari were whooping and firing splinter rifles. The next a White Scars land speeder Tempest dropped from the canyon rim above, its multi-melta vaporizing the lead bike before soaring back up and away. The remaining Reavers, disoriented, were cut down by a passing squad of Outriders who never even slowed down. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. It was the most alive I'd felt since Cadia fell. Hours later, the raid was over. The Drukhari fleet, bled and harried, vanished back into the void from whence they came. The cost had been high. Several Logister convoys, too slow to adapt, had been gutted. The Ultramarines' perfect plan was in tatters. We stood amidst the wreckage of a downed Drukhari raider, its alien metal still sizzling. The air stank of ozone, promethium, and the peculiar, coppery scent of Xeno's blood. A lone White Scars bike, its engine purring like a contented predator, pulled up beside us. The rider removed his helmet. He was young, for an Astartes, his face marked with tribal tattoos, his eyes bright with the aftermath of the hunt. "Sergeant," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The Khan noticed your unit. You are adaptable. 4 ground pounders." Lissa actually smirked. We learn fast when someone's trying to peel our skin off. The White Scar gave a sharp, approving nod. "The Khan says a wall that cannot move is a tomb. You showed you are not yet ready for the tomb." He revved his engine. "Remember the wind, Sergeant. It does not try to stop the rock. It goes around it, and in time, it wears the rock away." He sped off, kicking up a spray of dust. We were left in the sudden quiet. The Ultramarines were already broadcasting new orders, damage assessments, plans for reorganization. The machine was trying to reassert itself. But something had changed. We had tasted a different kind of war. A war of movement, of instinct, of freedom. Gilliman's way was the mind, the grand, logical design. The Khan's way was the body, the lightning-fast reflex, the gut feeling that keeps you alive. Oria's looked troubled. The Regent's plan, it almost failed. All those supplies lost. Plans are static, I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. The enemy is not. The Khan understands that. He doesn't fight the enemy's army. He fights their will. He shows them that nowhere is safe. Lissa was watching the horizon where the white scars had disappeared. He's not building an empire, she said quietly. He's protecting a people. There's a difference. I looked at my squad. They were tired, dirty, but their eyes held a new light. The sedative of Gilliman's efficiency had worn off, replaced by the adrenaline of the Khan's storm. We had been a cog in a machine. For a few hours, we had been a spark in a hurricane. The Ultramarines would retake control. The lists would be rewritten, the losses tallied, the strategy adjusted. But the seed was planted. The Lord Commander of the Imperium believed in a perfect, logical system. But the Warhawk knew a secret every grunt learns in his first firefight. No plan survives first contact. And sometimes, the only way to win is to let go of the plan, draw your blade, and ride out to meet the storm. The White Scar's storm had passed, leaving a strange, hollow silence in its wake. The Drakari were gone, but the air still thrummed with the memory of their speed, a stark contrast to the methodical, grinding advance of the Ultramarines. Gilliman's Logister Corps was already at work, their data slates clicking like prayer beads as they tallied the losses, their faces grim. The Khan's unorthodox tactics had saved the frontline units, but the supply lines had been savaged. Efficiency had been bloodied by pragmatism. We were reassigned again. This time, to a pacification and purification detail. A world named Viridia, a stone's throw from the Seraph system, had been scoured of major traitor forces by the initial Primarch-led counteroffensives. But the place was still sick. The taint of the warp had seeped into its soil, its water, its very air. Our job was to hold the line while the Adeptus Mechanicus and a specialized detachment of the Death Guard, the original Death Guard, the dour, unyielding sons of Mordoran, performed what was termed a systematic cleansing. The transport ship down to Viridia was a solemn, echoing cathedral of iron. The air smelled of sacred oils, rust, and a faint, astringent chemical scent I couldn't place. No one spoke. The Ultramarines among us stood like blue statues, their discipline a wall against the planet's palpable sickness. The few White Scars who had been seconded to the mission paced like caged animals, their need for open spaces and speed stifled by the ship's confines. Viridia was gray. Not the gray of ash or stone, but the gray of necrosis. The sky was a perpetual, bruised twilight. The trees were skeletal, blackened things that seemed to claw at the heavens. The ground was a spongy morass that sucked at our boots, releasing a puff of foul, miasmic vapor with every step. The only sounds were the drip of acidic moisture and the distant, industrial thrum of the Death Guard's cleansing engines. We dug in on a low ridge overlooking a vast, polluted marsh that had once been a city. The orders were explicit: maintain a perimeter. Allow no ingress or egress. Observe and report any anomalous phenomena. For 2 days, nothing happened. We watched the Death Guard work. They moved through the toxic fog like ghosts in sullen green armor, their faces hidden behind grotesque, rebreather-equipped helms. They didn't speak. They simply They set up massive, rumbling incinerators that burned the corrupted biomass with chemical fires that gave off no heat, only a cold, blue light. They pumped the poisoned groundwater into vast, lead-lined tankers. Their work was as methodical as the Ultramarines, but devoid of any sense of purpose beyond grim necessity. On the third day, the phenomena started. It began with the Vox. A whisper so faint it could have been static. A child's voice, calling a name you almost recognized. Then the fog would shift, and for a heartbeat, you'd see a figure. A woman in a tattered dress, a man missing the lower half of his body, a child holding a stuffed toy that was now just a lump of rot. They would look at you with pleading eyes, then dissolve back into the mist. Phantasms, an ultramarine lieutenant declared, his voice crisp with certainty. Residual psychic echoes. Ignore them. They have no material substance. He was right. They couldn't hurt you. Not physically. But they scraped at the inside of your skull, picking at the scabs of memory and loss every soldier carries. I saw Lissa flinch as a phantom of a young girl, no older than she might have been once, reached out with a skeletal hand before fading. Aureus prayed louder, his litanies a shield against the whispers. The Death Guard ignored them completely. They trudged through the apparitions as if they were nothing more than inconvenient smoke. Then, on the fourth night, the machine spirits rebelled. It started with the Auspex. The screens, which had shown a clean, empty marsh, suddenly bloomed with life signs. Hundreds of them, moving towards our position. We scrambled to the firing line, our new Acatran las guns humming as we powered them up. But nothing emerged from the fog. The Auspex shrieked its warning, the runes blinking crimson, yet the marsh remained still and silent. Then the heavy bolter emplacement on our left flank spun on its axis, its servo motors whining in protest, and opened fire on the mortar team to its right. Chaos. Pure, unadulterated chaos. Vox channels were jammed with screams and panicked reports. Las cannon power packs overheated and vented plasma for no reason. A Chimera's engine revved to a screaming pitch before seizing solid. The very technology we relied on was turning against us, possessed by a malicious, unseen intelligence. Warpcraft. The ultramarine lieutenant roared, his bolter held high. A sorcerer is among them. Find the source. But there was no source. There was only the fog, the whispers, and the betrayal of our own machines. Through the bedlam, a single, calm voice cut across the Vox. It was a dry, rasping sound, like stone grinding on stone. It held no panic, no rage. Only a weary, profound certainty. Cease fire. Lower your weapons. It is not a sorcerer. Mordrin. He emerged from the toxic mist as if he were a part of it. He was a giant of tarnished, death-green armor, encrusted with the grime of countless battlefields. In one hand, he carried Silence, a massive, scythe-like reaper gun that seemed to drink the wan light. His face was pale and gaunt, almost skeletal, his features fixed in a permanent rictus of grim endurance. He didn't look at the phantasms or the malfunctioning machines. He looked at the marsh itself. You are fighting the symptom, he rasped, his voice barely louder than the whispers. The disease is the planet's memory, the pain of its death. It has learned to reflect our own fears, our own tools, back at us. He walked slowly to the center of our panicked perimeter, ignoring the lost bolt that zipped past his helm from a trooper firing at a phantom. He knelt, placing a massive, gauntlet hand on the spongy ground. The Ultramarines would try to build a better Auspex. The white scars would ride away from it. The Imperial fists would build a wall against it. He looked up, his hollow eyes sweeping over us. None of that will work. You cannot outlogic a memory. You cannot outrun a ghost. You cannot wall out what is already inside. He stood, hefting Silence. The only way to cleanse a sickness is to endure it, to outlast it, to show it that you are more stubborn than the pain. He began to speak then, not a prayer, not an incantation, but a list. A grim, monotonous recitation of facts. He listed the chemical compounds of the toxins in the water. He listed the bacterial strains festering in the soil. He listed the spectral frequencies of the psychic echoes. His voice, that dry, rasping monotone, was a counterpoint to the hysterical whispers. It was the voice of absolute, unflinching reality. As he spoke, the phantasms began to waver. The whispering grew faint, confused. The Auspex screens flickered, the false life signs sputtering and dying. The heavy bolter fell silent. Mordron was not banishing the ghosts with faith or fire. He was boring them to death with the cold, hard, unbearable facts of their own demise. He was reminding the planet's pain of what it truly was. A chemical process, a biological failure, a resonant echo. He was draining it of its mystery, and thus, its power. After what felt like an eternity, he stopped speaking. The marsh was silent. The fog was just fog. The machines were merely broken. He turned his skeletal gaze on the ultramarine lieutenant. Your technology failed because it was built on a foundation of assumed stability. The universe is not stable. It is a vector for decay. Your logic is a shield against a reality it refuses to acknowledge." He then looked at me, and for a moment, I felt the full weight of his bleak philosophy. There was no hope in his eyes. No light. Only the grim satisfaction of a diagnosis confirmed. "The soldier understands," Mordon stated, his voice flat. "He lives in the rot. He sees the truth of things. He knows that endurance is the only victory that matters." With that, he turned and walked back into the mist, leaving us in a silence that was now merely empty, not haunted. We spent the next week finishing the cleansing operation. The phantasms did not return. The machines, once purified by the tech priests, functioned normally. But something had changed in us. We had seen a different kind of strength. Not the strength to conquer, or to build, or to ride free, but the strength to endure. To stare into the absolute worst the galaxy could offer, acknowledge its vile reality, and simply refuse to die. Guilliman offered a future. The Khan offered freedom. But Mordorian offered a cold, comfortless truth. In the end, the only thing you truly own is your capacity to suffer. And sometimes, that is enough. They say a war ends with a bang or a whimper. Ours ended with a sigh. A long, ragged exhalation of breath from a galaxy that had forgotten how to breathe. The final mustering was not on a field of victory, but in the cold, sterile hangar bay of the Macridge's honor. It was a place of polished decking and echoing vastness, smelling of ozone and sanctified metal. We stood in our ragged ranks, the Cadian 112th, what was left of us. We were 100 souls where there had once been 1,000. Our new Akatran lasguns felt alien in our hands, our fresh uniforms still stiff and unwelcoming. We were ghosts haunting the machine of a new Imperium. Before us, on a raised dais, stood the returned sons. It was a sight to steal the sanity from any mortal mind. The demigods of legend gathered not for war, but for an ending. Rogel Dorn stood like a fortress, his gaze sweeping over us as if assessing our structural integrity. His presence was a wall of silent, unyielding fact. Angron simmered, a contained explosion of rage, his brass-plated fists clenching and unclenching. The butcher's nails were a visible hum of agony around his skull. He was a wound in reality, barely stitched closed. Fulgrim was preternaturally still, a statue of perfection, his disdain for the messy, human spectacle around him a palpable chill. Robert Guilliman stood at the center, a data slate in his hand, his face a mask of weary calculation. He was the architect, already drafting the blueprint for the piece to come. Vulcan was a shadowed monolith of grim patience, his hammer resting on his shoulder, his eyes holding the memory of shattered stone and forgotten threats. Jagatai Khan paced at the edge of the dais, a caged storm, his energy a stark contrast to the funereal stillness. He was already looking for the horizon. Mordorian stood apart, a pillar of grim endurance, his skeletal frame seeming to absorb the light, a testament to the truth of decay. And there were others, whose auras pressed upon our souls. The Lion, a shadow of nightly vengeance. Leman Russ, a primal force of Fong and Frost. Corax, a whisper of righteous terror. And Sanguinius, the angel. His beauty was a pain to behold, a reminder of all that had been lost and, impossibly, regained. His wings, white and gold, were folded behind him, and his eyes held a sorrow so deep it felt like looking into the aftermath of a star's death. They were all here, the pantheon of mankind's hope and damnation, reunited. Guilliman stepped forward. His voice, amplified, was not the booming pronouncement of a tyrant, but the clear, cold tone of an administrator delivering a final report. The Seraph Corridor is secured. The traitor legions are in full retreat. The Drukhari raiders have been bled. The Xenos taint has been purged. By the grace of the Emperor and the returned strength of his sons, this sector of the Imperium is now stable. He paused, his ancient eyes scanning our faces. He saw the cost. He saw the dead. He processed it. The work of reconstruction begins now. A new crusade, not of conquest, but of reclamation. We will rebuild what was broken. We will restore order. We will ensure that the sacrifice of every soldier, from the highest Lord General to the lowliest guardsman, was not in vain. It was a good speech. A perfect speech. It was everything we were supposed to want to hear. Order. Safety. A future. But as I looked at the faces of my squad, I saw not jubilation, but a profound and weary confusion. Lissa's eyes were narrowed, analyzing the Primarchs as if they were tactical problems. Oria's looked lost, his simple faith overwhelmed by the complex, conflicting realities of the demigods he had worshipped. The others just looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep cannot fix. The Khan stopped pacing. His voice, when he spoke, was a sharp crack in Gilliman's polished oratory. "And what of the wind, brother?" he asked, his tone challenging. "Will your new Imperium have room for those who cannot live within your walls? Or will you build a gilded cage?" Dorn's voice was a low rumble. "A cage that protects is preferable to the freedom of the abattoir." "Is it?" Fulgrim's melodic voice held a knife's edge of mockery. "Where is the perfection in mere survival? Where is the art in stacking bricks?" "Art?" Angron snarled, the word a bloody thing ripped from his throat. "You talk of art while the nails sing their red song in my skull. There is no art. There is only the rage. The pain. It is the only truth. The truth is that the universe is a vector of decay," Mordoran rasped, his dry voice a pall over the rising tension. "Your walls will crumble. Your art will fade. Your rage will burn out. Only the endurance of the inevitable remains." Vulcan said nothing. He simply watched, his silence a deeper judgment than any of their words. I looked from one Primarch to another. The unbreakable wall. The unstoppable hammer. The perfect artist. The logical administrator. The enduring plague doctor. The untamable storm. They were brothers. And they were fundamentally, irrevocably opposed. They had returned, and in their returning, they had not saved us. They had shown us the truth. The Imperium we had bled for 10,000 years was a patchwork compromise, a desperate attempt to hold together philosophies that were never meant to coexist. They were the original, shattered pieces, and now that they were back, the fragile whole was coming apart. Gilliman saw it too. The weary exhaustion in his eyes deepened. He was not a ruler presiding over a united kingdom. He was a scholar trying to bind a library of contradictory, world-ending texts into a single volume. The briefing ended. The Primarchs departed, each to their own ship, their own method, their own vision for mankind's future. The unity was a fiction. The war was over, but the argument had just begun. We were dismissed. We filed out of the hangar, a silent, broken column. We were given new orders. We were being redeployed to a quiet sector, a garrison world on the edge of Ultramar. It was a reward, a soft posting, a place to rest. As we boarded our transport, a shadow fell over me. I turned. It was the angel, Sanguinius. He had descended from the dais without a sound. He stood before me, and the sheer presence of him, the sorrow and the grace, was a physical weight. He did not look at me as a data point, or a stone in a wall, or a piece of flawed material. He looked at me as a man. "Sergeant," he said, and his voice was the sound of a heart breaking beautifully. "You carry it all, do you not? The weight of their differences." I could not speak. I could only nod. "They see a galaxy to be built, or conquered, or endured," he whispered, his gaze looking through me, into the weary soul of every soldier who had ever held the line. "They forget what they are building it for." He placed a hand on my shoulder. It was not heavy. It was featherlight, yet it carried the weight of 10,000 years of hope and loss. "You are the last, best thing, Sergeant Kalen of the Cadian 112th, he said, his eyes holding mine. "You are the man in the mud. The one who fights for the soldier next to him. Not for a philosophy, or a perfect wall, or a glorious rage. But for a person. That is the only thing the darkness cannot understand. That is the only thing that truly matters. Remember that. When the arguments of gods shake the stars, remember the man in the mud." He withdrew his hand, gave me a final, devastatingly sad smile, and was gone. The transport ramp closed. The engines whined. We lifted off, leaving the Macrag's honor and its council of warring gods behind. We were heading for a quiet world. A soft posting. But I knew, as I looked at the faces of my squad, at Lissa's sharp cynicism, at Oria's shattered faith, at the weary resilience of the others, that there were no quiet posts. Not anymore. The galaxy was remaking itself, and the arguments of demigods would be fought with the blood of mortals. But the angel was right. We had something they had lost, something they could never build with logic or break with rage. We had each other. The guy next to you. The rest was just noise and lost fire. The war was over. A new, stranger, more terrifying war was beginning. And we, the grunts in the mud, would have to find a way to be human within it. It was the last, best thing we could do.